Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about a couple of very important topics. One is about the economic impact of these floods. Remember, in 2010 we went through something similar. But interestingly, after 12 years, I would say we haven't learned anything. And this time, this is a mega super flood that is experienced all over Pakistan, over 120 districts. Can you imagine? Look at what has happened in Sindh, in KP, in Punjab. Balochistan is the worst hit. There's going to be huge shortage of food in the coming days. You can well imagine by seeing the prices, they've been tripled. I'm talking about the fruit and vegetable. And then the supply chain that has also been disrupted. You talk about the cattle, over 1 million. That is what most of these farmers they have lost. You talk about the kharif crops, 80% of it has been destroyed. And I'm not sure whether we'll be able to prepare the land for the future harvesting. That is something of prime concern. Now, interestingly, the spell has come to an end, but we are expecting another one to come after maybe 6 or 7 days. But remember, this water, these flash floods which started from KP, rather let's go further north, from Gilgit-Baltistan all the way down. You must have seen these huge boulders rolling in that river. Obviously, how can we expect that the bridges would stand in front of them and will stop? No. They took along the infrastructure, the building, hotels, you name it, and it's been done. Now, when we look at the magnitude of this, I would say it could have an impact of around 1.5% as far as our GDP is concerned, perhaps more, because we are not exactly sure the level of damage that has occurred. Perhaps in the coming days we'll get to understand about the magnitude of this super flood, as I called it earlier. Now, the government is pretty much geared up, but obviously the resources are limited. Military is everywhere trying to rescue people. And again, when we talk about the relief and rescue operations, they are also very limited. More than 1,200 people so far have lost their lives. And the number which I'm going to give you now will be very shocking for you, that as we speak now, the point is that 33 million people, that's 3.3 crore people, have been displaced or affected in one way or the other. These poor people, they have lost everything, their houses, there's nothing there to support them. A couple of NGOs are definitely there. Now, we expect again the foreign community to help us. And a lot of help is also coming in. Yesterday we showed you the plane which landed from UAE and brought tents and food items. More than 600 cases of snake bites have only been reported in Rujhan, in this particular area. Just imagine. So again, we are talking about delivering food. They also need the anti-venom injections. You talk about the waterborne diseases, they are not there yet, but they will be there in another week's time or so. This is exactly what we have gone through during the last flood also. Prior to that, there was one in 2000, and then go back further, 1993. We haven't learned anything. No dams have been built to store this water, and now the water which we lost in 2010 was worth around $120 billion. So you can well imagine what we have lost now. Could have stored it, could have kept it for those times when we could have experienced drought. But nothing, sir. This is not the priority of any government. They're busy in their own politics. That is the most unfortunate part. But before I introduce you to our panelists, our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch that first.
Pakistan, which is already struggling with the daunting economic challenges and was crucially waiting for the IMF's board meeting, which will approve the scheduled release of a loan tranche worth $1.17 billion so that the nation's economy could be managed and the country could take an appropriate pace towards achievement of a sustainable growth and prosperity, was struck with one of the worst natural calamity in the history of Pakistan in the form of torrential monsoon rains and floods. This calamity, which has been repeatedly attributed to the phenomena of of climate change since its onset has claimed the lives of 1,033 people, according to the statistics given by the National Disaster Management Authority across the country. On the other hand, 1,527 individuals were also injured in various rain and flood-related incidents. Meanwhile, according to NDMA, more than 3,451 kilometers of roads, 149 bridges, 170 shops and 9,49,858 houses were damaged due to heavy rains in various districts of all the provinces, including Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir. These rains also caused losses of more than 7,19,000 livestock animals. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is very pertinently looking into all the relief and rehabilitation tasks and said that with the support of National Disaster Management Authority and other relevant departments, the federal government will continue to support the provincial governments in the rescue, relief and rehabilitation efforts. On the other hand, regarding the crucial meeting which is going to be held today between Pakistan and the IMF, Mufti Ismail said that Pakistan has fulfilled all the requirements of the IMF and the country will receive the next tranche after its board meeting. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister said politics over the agreement with International Monetary Fund could cause irreparable damage to Pakistan.
Welcome back after the break. Now we have with us in our studio on my right is Sardar Yasir Saab. Sardar Yasir Khan is the former president of Islamabad Chamber of Commerce and Industry and known industrial businessman, I would say. Thank you very much, Sardar Saab, for your time. And on Skype we have with us Dr. Khaqan Najeeb Saab, former advisor, Ministry of Finance. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for your presence as well. And we'll also be talking to Mr. Irfan Ghauri, a senior journalist. He's going to join us around 8:30 perhaps. But let me put this first question, straight question, sir. I mean, we'll be talking about the IMF deal because there was certain story that, you know, this is how we're going to move forward. $1.2 billion will be released, and perhaps because of the floods thing would be pretty easy. But most likely that particular meeting that was supposed to be held today has been cancelled, but I'm not sure. We'll get to know about it. Nothing of that sort. But, sir, keeping that aside, because that's a bailout package that we urgently need no matter what. Again, there are a couple of very, I would say, you know, strong, perhaps, strong is still a very light word in this case. Yeah. The kind of demands that have been put. Obviously, when we talk about electricity bills, we talk about the increasing inflation. Yesterday, it was recorded at 44%. It's going to go further up because of these floods. Not sure what it's going to look like in another month or so. But reports are not good. I mean, you have become a country that is wheat importing now, 4 million tons you already wanted and needed. Perhaps you'll be requiring more now. You don't have much money in your kitty either. I mean, you pick up any particular, you know, index and you'll get to know that, you know, when you look at the economic indicators, most of them are perhaps very, very alarming. Let me put it this way. But now, sir, the most important factor, it was Allah's will that this flood approach, though the Met Office exactly 3 months ago predicted that this is what is going to happen, you should gear up, you should have some contingency plan. Better focus on this rather than the domestic politics and, you know, blaming each other. But unfortunately, whosoever was in power or in opposition, they were all busy doing that. You know, the reactive approach, oh, now the flood has come, now what? Now this is what has happened. Now, what I would like to ask you, sir, that you being a businessman, somebody who's been, you know, looking at the overall situation, the economic, perhaps the indicators, and then you talk about the future forecast and all. Now, what I mean is that after this flood, what do you see happening, sir? Because it seems like an absolute disaster, absolute disaster. Your take.
I think it's one of the worst catastrophes that Pakistan has faced in many decades. You know, after the earthquake that we had back in 2006, this is probably a calamity which is of similar scale in terms of devastation that's caused to the entire nation. Many people have obviously lost their lives. A lot of the people have lost their homes.
These are the reported ones.
Absolutely.
Those who are missing, God knows what's the number.
So my question is, you know, we're doing all of this that we can from the private sector and the government sector, and we're saying that there's going to be a rehabilitation program. What about the numbers that are not registered? What about the people and individuals that were off record? So many of them that were living in un-urban plan communities didn't have any registration of their, their houses, didn't have any official bill system, no utility charges they were paying. Many of them didn't have ID cards. How are you going to get to those? There's many people who've lost their children. I mean, what are we looking at in terms of compensation? Can a financial number actually compensate them for that? The trauma, the scar that's been caused. But obviously, the one thing we've always said is we need policy and structural reforms. Imagine we had a proper record system. So for example, in COVID-19, in the rest of the world, everybody were registered in developed countries. So with that registration, a certain amount was sent out to them. Checks were sent to their mailing addresses, not physically. We still have a mechanism where we require people to physically come and show us their ID cards for us to be able to give them any sort of a benefit, any sort of a package, any sort of relief. Whereas that shouldn't happen in today's day and age. Everything is computerized, everything is digitized worldwide, but we're not able to achieve that in Pakistan. So many of these people are not going to be able to get any form of relief simply because they're not recorded. There's no record of them. And that's unfortunate for us. And I think, in terms of the economic side, you said yourself that, we're looking at least perhaps 1%, 1.5% of the current country's size of economy. You're looking at about $4 billion. Because if you look at the current account deficit,
you might end up having negative growth.
I mean,
as far as your
already anticipated
agriculture is
because
concerned.
From IMF side, and this is surprising, say in the previous tenure we had achieved 6.5% record growth. That was historic for Pakistan during the good days. This is right after COVID when everything was doing well. We had gone back towards revival. You had everything working for you because the utility charges were brought down, tariffs, single rate tariffs were introduced. We allowed the factories to operate. So we did everything we could to promote exports, and exports were touching record numbers. GDP was doing good. And then all of a sudden with the change of regime, you now have the IMF saying that, your GDP growth is going to be perhaps around 4.5%, and now 3.5%. They've gone down 1.5% more. And with all of these floods, we know that the agro is going to take the biggest hit. We're not going to be able to export. Obviously, the wheat is one aspect. There's going to be many more. We're going to be importing perhaps
cotton fields have been destroyed. So rice, berries, they've been destroyed.
So your economy will
Wheat
shrink.
is going to be another issue.
It's really, really unfortunate that we're heading towards an induced recession, perhaps, because when we look at the rest of the world markets, we're also anticipating a recession happening perhaps in Europe and
slowdown,
US.
absolutely.
If that happens, we're going to be facing a huge detrimental impact on Pakistan's economy because we're importing everything, and we're importing everything in the dollar. So even if they manage to stabilize the dollar now, it's not going to be stable coming down 6 months down the line, because if there is a recession happening worldwide, dollar is going to go up and commodities is going to get more expensive.
That is what happened. Dollar got stronger today against all the countries.
Interest rates are going to go up worldwide. So what do you think the state bank is going to do?
So we are still at 15%.
We're charging 17% net. That's unbelievable, because if you go to the rest of the world, if you go to London, go to the US, commercial lending rates are at 5% today. So even if they do go up by 1.5% or 2%, that's still realistic in that part of the world. But for us, are we going to go to 20%? If it does, are we going to be able to do any business? So I can see the economy contracting in this sort of a scenario.
Even if you increase 1% further, 100 basis points,
yes,
the impact is going to be terrible on your economic growth in these given circumstances. So it is going to be a mega challenge for the financial managers, whosoever is looking after these particular issues. But let me also bring in Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Dr. Saab, please tell us, because there was this news that perhaps somebody tweeted actually that most likely this IMF meeting that was scheduled for today in Washington has been cancelled. What sort of an update do you have?
Thank you for having me on your show. It's always my pleasure to be on PTV World. I think, first of all, the nation, the politicians, the executive, the establishment, everyone in Pakistan has to understand that with the kind of current account deficit that we ran last year, with the kind of fiscal deficit we ran last year, being in an IMF program is extremely important, considering the global commodity price rise, considering the global commodity shortages, considering the global slowdown. In that scenario, if we had been in an IMF program since February, in which we had to complete our 7th review, I think things would have been much calmer than they are today. But in July, we did the staff level agreement. What I hear is that, inshallah, today, Pakistan's case in a few hours would be put up to the board for approval. Of course, things that happened over the weekend and on Friday have kind of disturbed everyone. But I think these are still minor in nature. Pakistan's review would be put up, and we all hope that we would be able to get $1.17 billion in the next week. And with that, we should start getting in monies from the World Bank, the ADB, the other multilaterals, our friends, and some commercial paper as well, which should help shore up the $7.8 billion very uncomfortable reserves position that we hold with the State Bank of Pakistan. There are just more than a month's needs of Pakistan's imports. That's not a good sign. Minimum 2 and comfortable 3 months of Pakistan's imports needs should be held with the State Bank of Pakistan. And I think that's where we stand on the IMF. But that's still the easier part. Getting to the board approval is it seemed a very difficult part.
But a lot of people, a lot of analysts, Khaqan Sahab, do believe that perhaps because of these floods, because, this morning and even last night, this was one of the major news all over the international media, especially CNN. Now, the point is, sir, that on one side, the board has approved the deal. IMF will immediately release, let's say, 1.17 or 1.2 billion. And then there is another very interesting fact that they may also provide up to 4 billion over the remainder of the current fiscal year, which began on the July 1st. Now, obviously, the terms and conditions associated with this kind of a deal, let me use this word terrible. That is terrible. Look at the kind of pressure the people are going through because of the electricity bills. A poor man who is earning 22,000 rupees is ending up receiving the electricity bill of around 36,000 rupees. I mean, this has become a norm. God knows what they're up to, what they're thinking. But this is what the reality is. Now, do you think because of this flood, perhaps we could end up accumulating a little more? According to one of the analysts, they say 500 million could be given to us in that regard also. But that is going to be nothing, just peanuts. Because I remember during the 2005 earthquake, Dr. Saab, General Musharraf was the president, we ended up accumulating $7.6 billion and we had no capacity to, in fact, deliver the goods and look after the infrastructure. Still the problem remains. A lot of people hasn't got any money. Those promises which were made, let's say, almost 17 years ago, they're still there. You talk about 2010 flooding. That also again, had a lot of impact, negative one, on our economy. And at that time, we ended up getting around $2.7 billion too. What about now, sir? This is a mega super storm.
So we have to understand one point that, I think a myth has been created in Pakistan that IMF drives energy prices in Pakistan. I think we have to come to terms with this fact that IMF only asks us that whatever the right energy price is in Pakistan, whether that's the petrol price, whether that's the electricity price, or whether that's the gas price, should be charged so that the state, which cannot take the burden of these kinds of subsidies, should be eliminated, and especially subsidies if we are giving petrol to UI and the vulnerable together at the same price. So I think that's something we have to think about. But of course, IMF does force a lot of price changes in the short run because they are trying to contract the economy, contract demand, reduce subsidies, reduce the fiscal deficit. So what you're saying is true at that extent. But as we move with the fund now, and the situation has changed, the numbers that were agreed for this review for this fiscal year 23 have changed. The current account deficit would change. So on the fiscal side, I think what we need to do with them is use adjusters. Adjusters are monies that you could ask of the IMF, which you need to spend in terms of expenditure on the vulnerable. Let's say a couple of 100 billion rupees need to be spent on the income support. Some monies have been spent on relief, some monies need to be spent on rehabilitation, and then some monies on the reconstruction. So whatever we could create from the budget, that's the first thing. Then IMF gave us a facility called the Rapid Financing Instrument that they have.
Yeah, RFI, yeah.
So we used RFI in COVID for about $1.4 billion. The RFI should be used again with the fund, and more than $500 million could be asked of them. I think World Bank has already reapproved some monies to go to the flood affectees. Similarly, ADB, the other multilaterals, and then aid from countries. And then, very importantly, we should be thinking about INGOs. You would remember that INGOs, in the need for being more secure, or for the security needs, have their role has been reduced in the countries. These INGOs, the genuine ones, have both expertise and money, and they were used in the floods in 2010. So they would have to be used. So all this needs to be mustered. The other thing that I think we need to do, and we have started on that process, is that we need to import onions, tomatoes, and greens. So these are three things which have in the immediate gone, kind of missing.
And most likely, what I would have learned that Miftah was saying, that most likely we'll import them from India. Let's see that happens. But sir, we have also been joined in by Irfan Ghauri Saab, senior columnist, writer, journalist. Assalamu alaikum, Ghauri Saab. Irfan Ghauri Saab, can you hear me, sir? Assalamu alaikum.
Ji, walaikum assalam. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly fine, sir. Good to have you in the program, and thank you very much for sharing your time with us. Sir, I've heard that you are in the field, perhaps, looking after the disaster that has been because of these floods. What's the update, sir? Where are you, and what's the news you have to share with us?
Faisal, as we all have been, seeing, the situation is really, really grave. Especially when you see in Sindh and Balochistan and KPK, I don't think there is any province left except, this year AJK was the only area we had where the extent of the damages are relatively low. The reason was that this year the rainfall in AJK is below normal. But when you see the statistics of that have been, that the meteorological department has shown, the scale of rain that this year we received, especially in Sindh and Balochistan, that is unprecedented. So the after effects of that that we have been seeing is the devastation, and the numbers, they are increasing, and we fear that in the coming days the hardships of these people, they will increase. Not only that, millions, would be suffering because of the families, they have lost their livelihoods, their agriculture has been destroyed, they don't have any shelter. Then this monsoon season where we usually the mosquitoes and other the insects and the diseases that we see, there are we fear that if immediate steps were not taken, there is a real danger of spread of the malaria, cholera, hepatitis, and all other
even dengue.
And the dengue, yes, dengue, of course, the dengue, of course. So this is actually the time that we as a nation, we have seen, there are many good examples that many people, philanthropists, many people as individually, and many organizations, they have come. But the scale is so big that we as a nation would have to stand up, and we have to, immediately we need, this relief and rehabilitation. And then I would say that we need to learn the lessons that this climatic catastrophe that we have been facing, the experts have been warning us for the last so many years that Pakistan would, is one of the worst affected, country, one of the top, 10 countries that would be affected by climate change. And we are seeing it now, and we need to take those steps that can mitigate the impact of that. We, this year we didn't see any spring season. If you remember that immediately after.
Sir, the reality is, Ghauri Saab, there is no more spring, there is no more autumn.
Yes.
You switch off your AC and after perhaps 2 weeks you switch on your heater, and exactly the same, you switch off your heater or your converter and you're back on AC after 2 weeks. There's no spring. This is a reality.
And
I wonder, I fail to understand. Please tell me, where is the government? What are they thinking and what were they thinking when the Met Office very categorically mentioned that this is what is going to happen? So they were looking after their own personal political interest rather than actually working on what has happened and whatever has caused this mess, sir.
Faisal,
is this the priority?
Yes, Faisal, this is something where it's, as a nation, we all are culprits.
Because they will blame the nature now.
No, the thing is that, what we see in the cities, that the nalas and the passages of the water, they have been choked because of, the encroachments that we do. Similarly, we have been seeing that, the people who do not have land, they get their houses built near the river.
It's not the person who has bought that encroached land and ended up building a hotel right in the middle of the Swat River, sir. I think the department that has issued him the NOC, that individual, whosoever has signed, should be hanged. That is the problem.
True. That's true. And
every year this happens, sir. This is going to be a regular phenomenon in the coming days.
This would be certainly. And Faisal, I tell you, there are certain things which already we have studies that if we can build some, dams, some, water storage spaces. I tell you example of, Rajanpur and BG Khan, which are the worst affected in Punjab. One of the
spoke to our correspondents yesterday. I mean, I was shocked to know what is going on out there, sir.
Yes,
because Suleiman on one side, Indus River is swelling like anything, sir. And then these people are living in a sandwich. Nobody to look after them. So the case of Rujhan, you name it.
Yes, and Faisal, the easy solution, and there have been studies that, there are two nalas that bring that water. And if small dams, they could be built there, the extent of damage, it can be controlled. Those studies were done, decades back, but we haven't done anything.
Because that is not the priority, sir. That is not the priority. The priority is to end up having some funds, few in your own personal accounts, remaining 5% dispersed.
And
unfortunately, I have to be very honest.
That's true. And Faisal, and in Rajanpur, we know that there are, millions of acres of land that is barren. And the people over there, all over the year, they wait for the rain. But when these floods come, they wash away everything. If at those places, these are just examples of one or two districts, I'm telling you. There are several other places where if we can...
Sir, 122 districts have been affected. 122. You're talking about to put all the population of Scandinavia together, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and multiply it with 3. That doesn't even make 33 million, sir.
That's true. And right now, most of us, when I see on our media, when I see our politicians, what we talking about is immediate relief, and that's it. And I tell you, Faisal, like we had seen in
what immediate relief, sir? Are we America? They couldn't even control the disaster, but at least you need to be proactive. You need to understand that this could happen, and this is how we need to have a proper plan in place. But nobody bothered. They're still, talking about the audio leaks and, God knows what and what not. I mean, this is the priority, to blame each other, unfortunately, sir. Because at the end of the day, Ghauri Sahab, the people of Pakistan are dying. The country of Qaid is underwater, sir. This is the reality.
That's the reality, and Faisal,
you stay with us, Ghauri Sahab, you stay with us. Let me also tell you that we have with us Dr. Khaqan, Najeeb, and Sardar Yasir Saab, the former president of ICCI. Let me put this question to you, Sardar Saab. Unfortunately, sir, I'm 50 years old, and almost 66% of the age of Pakistan, sir, नाजुक दौर से गुजर रहे हैं, sir. This Nazuk Daur is not going to stop, never will stop because of these, what should I call them? The point is, sir, that at the end of the day, this is my country, this is your country, this is our country. But sir, the way we have sorted out our priorities, that is very, very unfortunate. People have been dying left, right and center, and these are poor people. They've lost everything they had, sir. Their houses, their lands have been eroded, the livestock they had is gone. They have no roof, no shelter, no food to eat, nothing. And you're not talking about the IDPs displaced, perhaps 1 million or 2 million, 33 million, sir.
I mean, it's really unfortunate. Look, you've got to look at it. Two statements I'd like to make here. We believe that prevention is the best cure, so that's exactly where you are infuriated and you're upset, because if we had...
So when I see those people, father has been saved, the daughter just went along, and she died. The body was never going to be recovered. I mean, that is what hurts me.
Parents that were burying their kids in you know, plastic bags because they didn't have the right cloths available, didn't have the coffin available.
Sir, really they don't even have the place to bury them. It's all underwater.
Exactly. And how unfortunate is that? The other thing is, look, we as a nation are dependent on politics, whereas we should be dependent on policy, and that's the differentiating factor between us and the developed world.
Politicians are supposed to make the policy.
Well, that's what we're saying, that we're dependent on politics because we shouldn't do politics. We shouldn't be based on politics. It should be based on policy, which is based on you know, longevity, based on long-term planning for the greater good of the country. So if you look at us and you compare us with the rest of the world, we're already maybe at least 100 years behind simply because of policy. You know, we look at high-rises, skyscrapers worldwide. We don't see them here.
Sir, we're not 100 years, sir.
Maybe
do
more?
You think? No, 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 sir. No. Let's say 1,000 years, because sir, can we build a bridge which was built in 1936 that is called in San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge? Do you think we have the capacity to even come up with that kind of an idea?
We
No,
have
sir.
the resources.
We will have the Chinese.
We're missing the technical know-how. We're missing the policy. And if we had the policy in place, I promise you, everything is doable in Pakistan. It depends how willingly the government is wanting to do these things, get them implemented. Look, going back to some of the basics here, look, as a nation, we're in a very bad position right now. The IMF, we're just talking about the basic numbers. You know, 1.2 billion will be given. The US and the IMF cannot afford for an unstable region on the border of Afghanistan. Things are bad as it is. If there's any more instability in Pakistan, who's going to control the border? So that 1.2 billion is going to be given, but that's not enough. And like you said, with the rapid you know, fund program, the instrument, that's again, that was given back in 2020 anyway with the, you know, the COVID program. They gave you another 1.3 billion. So 500 million now is nothing compared to actually what's required, because the IMF themselves have stated that Pakistan's foreign exchange requirement will actually be about 40 billion, from which 34 billion is going to be debt payments, and out of which 6.5 million is going to be required for reserves. That's just that without the flood factoring in. So with rehab and with everything,
and another 15 billion
at least, right? So collectively, Pakistan's debt is, this is this year only this year. So collectively, Pakistan's debt is going to build up way over 100 billion in the next 2 to 3 years alone. How are we going to survive this way? And inflation, like you rightly said, is about 40%.
So you will sell your airports, you'll sell everything you have.
Look, these guys just put the import ban in place, right, to stabilize the import bill, which was what, hardly 5% impact.
So one more quick comment, sir. I was also shocked to know, because there was this report that says that Pakistan is promised, or somehow, you know, given the IMF a document that will be able to fetch around $37 billion from China, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar,
Let me give you an example.
And interestingly, you know, 12 billion from China, and then deferred payments of oil, and you know, and some loan, and some more loan, and then further loan, and then loan on top of loan.
Loan to pay off loan.
Yeah.
So let me give you a simple example. They went to Qatar right now and they're saying that 3 billion is going to come in from Qatar. We have about 200,000 Pakistanis working in Qatar, and Qatar's investment authority has the capability to spend $400 billion. They have $400 billion at the discretion, which is spent worldwide, especially in London. You look at the investments from Qatar, and there's many more opportunities like this. So Pakistan has collectively about 71 industrial states, out of which you have 22 SEZs. How much foreign investment have you brought in from any GCC country? 3 billion is a joke when you look at Pakistan's appetite,
and that
the potential.
That hasn't arrived yet.
Of course not, because
perhaps
this
that
is
going to, and they will see, and then they'll plan it out.
To IMF.
Absolutely.
And again, like you said, the 37 billion is just re-rolling of those loans. It's obviously deferred payments.
Absolutely.
On oil. So what's new here? Like you rightly said, this is just loan to pay off your interest and pay off previous loans. So we're in a vicious cycle. We're not moving out of it. I keep giving an example of a hamster. You put a hamster on a reel, and the hamster thinks he's going forward, but he's not. He's rolling in the exact same position, and that's the kind of joke you're giving to the Pakistani nation, the Pakistani businessman. It's like showing them a lollipop, and it's really unfortunate. I was going to the import bill. It was hardly, what, 3 to 4% ban in 3 months? So now they've raised duties by 49% on all those items. I'm not talking about luxury goods. I'm talking about basic necessities such as the sanitary equipment, such as curtains, such as lights, chandeliers, furniture, stuff which is not manufactured in Pakistan to that standard. So you've kind of scrutinized us for doing business. So the sector which is already contributing now has to contribute, what, 5 times, 10 times more to satisfy your need to be able to balance your payments, to balance your books, to get rid of the deficit. The deficit is already at 9.8 billion. We know it's going to keep increasing. So what are we trying to do here? Why can't we think out of the box, come up with reforms and use policies the world has used for many hundreds of years?
So if you will keep somebody who's brilliant enough to think out of the box, do you think he's going to survive with this system?
We have to. If we don't do it,
so we have to, but
I urge
the system is corrupt, so are the people.
So
are the decision makers.
The people
are
deprived. The people are deprived, and I think we need to empower the people, empower the institutions. We say the bureaucracy is bad. The bureaucracy is not bad. The bureaucracy is underprivileged.
No, bureaucracy is not bad. They're just corrupt.
They're corrupt because they've been underpaid. They're underprivileged. They've also not been given autonomy.
Sir.
Look, I'll tell you.
Underprivileged?
Give them autonomy. Give them autonomy. Don't give them this, that if this government is in place, you're going to be getting a secured seat. If that government comes, you're going to be gone tomorrow. That's exactly what happens.
We only blame our politicians?
I blame politicians.
The problem is that the bureaucratic setup in Pakistan is so strong that even a politician can't sneeze in front of them.
That's why you need structural reforms.
All right, sir. Structural reforms. So this is what IMF wants.
Dismantle it, redo it all over again. Get rid of everybody, rebuild it from scratch with fresh blood, young talent. We're actually doing brain drain. We're exporting all of our talent. When I go to institutions, academic institutions, I ask this first question: how many of you are willing to go overseas? 30 to 40% students in the auditoriums raise their hands. So we're exporting all of this talent. We can actually add value in Pakistan. And that's how the world has been developed. They've got all these innovative
Flight
ideas.
Of capital, a brain drain, and there is a long list. And again, you know,
it's time that we take a stand and bring about change.
How, sir?
Become a part of change. I would advocate
whosoever
for every
talked about
businessman.
change, I mean, sir, either they have been sent in the jail or
if we don't do it now,
electrocuted.
It's now or never. If we don't do it now, it's never going to happen. And
well,
we've
sir,
got to do it.
Let's ask Khaqan Saab, sir, because he is a very, very optimistic man, always smiling and has a lovely smile, and you know, look at him right now. Sir, any hope?
Of course. I mean, Pakistan is in a managerial crisis. All other crises that you talk about are manifestation of the managerial crisis that Pakistan continues to be in. Pakistan is in HR difficulty. HR is policy. I mean, don't ever forget that. HR is policy. There is nothing else. Now, in the short run, I mean, we have to manage through the IMF. You'll get a breather. You pick up some funds from your friendly countries and the other organizations. You rehabilitate the flood victims. That's become a priority. You import from India. You make sure that you have enough to feed the nation, especially the essential crops. And you start doing
we will make them friends. We'll also talk to them about the deferred payments. So, you know, you give us the food, and then, you know, we'll keep on fighting with you after having that kind of energy. The point is, sir, there's no policy. We do not understand. You know, sometimes we hear that the status of the most favored nation has been granted to India, and next day we hear about the Kargil war. I mean,
and then, of course, I mean, the world is open as we pick up our reserves. We would be able to import wheat if that is needed, so that the food inflation that is happening in the country stays, you know, at manageable levels. That is the biggest tax on people right now, and that's something in the next 6 months we should handle. But at the same time, the government has to find, you know, the structural reforms, I think, has become, a fad. I think we have to now get to the nitty-gritty and, you know, sort out 2 or 3 things in the next 3 to 5 years at least. We are not going to be able to do a whole lot of reform, but 2 areas, I think, which are going to cripple the economy. One is the energy sector, and we must decide what we want to do about it. I think the core decisions have not happened. Whether we want to privatize, which I think we should, and that's something we need to think about. We can sell the assets to Qataris.
You know, sir, one of the, I mean, people normally say the 60s were the best, time, because Pakistan was developing the Asian tigers and God knows what and what not. But again, sir, what I witnessed that during the time of Musharraf, things were pretty okay. We ended up hitting 8.5% growth rate also, if you remember, sir. Things were pretty okay, though there were like separate reasons for that. Shaukat Aziz Saab had a different mindset. He was a banker. He believed in the number game. Now the interesting factor is, at that time, the chairman, the deputy chairman of the planning commission, I was interviewing him. I moved back from Karachi to Islamabad, 2005 I'm talking about. And I said, sir, tell me one thing, that, you know, since you have this 2020 vision plan and that is brilliant, so let's suppose if we continue on this, and what sort of a Pakistan will I see in 2020? He said, you know, somewhat like Malaysia. I said, wow. So I went to Kuala Lumpur, ended up seeing, and I was impressed. But interestingly, sir, even in 2022, you know, when I switch on the TV, this is what I see. Either we are living on a moon. By the way, the Americans are sending another satellite to the moon today. But let's hope that, you know, that moon, because Pakistan has become a joke. Internationally, sir, we always say that, you know, we are a sovereign nation. What sovereignty, sir? We always end up going to various countries, so-called the friendly countries, with a begging bowl. Just imagine your best friend, whenever he comes and sees you, asks for money. Sir, once, twice, thrice, 4 times, you will not entertain him the 5th time, sir. And sir, we have been entertained for the last 75 years, sir. I think our friendly countries are amazing. Wow.
So I think it's become very...
Not a question. Please go ahead.
No, I understand. So, I mean, I think it's important that, you know, the severity of the BOP challenge, the balance of payments challenge, has to be met so that we do not, not pay our creditors, and there is no situation where this dollar liquidity crunch turns into a default situation. So we have to pass through that. And then, you know, the flood situation, as we talked about the crops, and then, as I said, energy. And secondly, I think we have to sort out our agriculture. I mean, the agri productivity has
been sorted out in these floods, sir. The poor farmer is going to die. This is the reality.
Truly,
you know, it's just like telling a cancer patient at the 4th stage that, you know what, you'll be fine. Yeah. You're just good to go. But you're not good to go, you're good to go up.
Truly, I mean, you know, agriculture has been hurt, it's been neglected. And as you say, I mean, the first, you know, I think good about 30, 40 years of Pakistan's existence, we were doing better than the South Asian countries, and now we've become laggards. So in any case, I mean, we need to pick up our act. And as I said, 3 things. I mean, competence, but focused in these 2 areas. If we just do these 2 areas in the next 2 to 3 years, we don't have the wherewithal to do a lot more. I mean,
all right, sir. All right, thank you. Ghauri sir, closing remarks from you, sir. Perhaps I'm too emotional to give those.
Yes, Faisal?
I'm saying, please, can you give the closing remarks?
Yeah, Faisal, the economy, I think my co-panelists, they have very elaborately, you know, they have discussed that. There are few things, Faisal, that, you know, we as a nation would have to decide now. And I would say, you know, they might be hard decisions, but we have to do that. You know, when we talk about investments, the investments come where they have conducive environment, you know, for investment and for business. And that conducive environment, we know that law and order, the extremism and all those things which we have in our society. How can we expect a foreigner, you know, to come here and invest where, you know, if you know, the locals, they have been, you know, taking their money out of this country. We discussed here that the brain drain, the people who are, you know, who could have served this country, they want to just, you know, leave the country. We have to stop that. Similarly,
put their name in the ECL, sir. They won't go.
Yes,
because I think,
you know,
Rehman Malik introduced this concept of putting containers to stop people from entering Islamabad. Yes. I think the only option we are left with is to put their names in ECL so they can't go. Simple as that. Anyway, sir, thank you very much, Ghauri Saab, for your participation, and I would also like to thank Khaqan Saab, and it's always a pleasure to have you in the program, so thank you very much. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you hopefully tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.
Excellent. Now you gave it to them. You gave it to them.